Hello, everyone. My name is Garrett Wong, and I'm the Member Services Manager here at the Green Sports Alliance. On behalf of the entire Alliance team, we hope all of you are staying safe and healthy, and thank you for taking the time with us to join our webinar. Our team's excited to bring our network together to discuss today's webinar on our upcoming Collegiate Zero Waste Playbook. I want to take this time to thank LMS Captioning for providing closed captioning services for today's session, and more information on how to use their service is included in the chat box, should be on your right-hand side of your screen. Should be seeing all of our lovely faces in the video right now, and along with the slide deck that we've got presented for you. So if you want to resize either the video feed or the slides, feel free to toggle those to your own personal preference. Head on over to the next slide, and we'll be making this webinar recording available following today's session on the Green Sports Alliance's YouTube page. Several of our recent webinars are already uploaded to that page, so feel free to take a look if some of the other topics are to your liking. For GSA members, we actually have a separate archive for older webinars that we've done dating back to, I believe, almost 2014 and 15. So for those member archives, feel free to email myself or another member of the Green Sports Alliance team for access. And I want to thank everyone that was able to attend our 10th annual Green Sports Alliance Summit. We hosted it virtually on Tuesday, October 13th, and Wednesday, October 14th, and we're able to bring together nearly 500 attendees for 2 days of timely conversations across the sports green movement. Had speakers from the IOC, Nike, NatureWorks, Major League Baseball, ESPN, and so many others. And we're really excited to continue this great work that we do with our theme of the future of sports and sustainability. And recordings of that session are available for viewing up until December 31st for all attendees. And you can purchase access to those recordings if you didn't attend live at a discounted rate. To find out more, visit our GSA Summit website at greensportsalliance.org/summit. And again, if there are any other questions that you have in terms of accessing the information, feel free to reach out to myself, Kristen Hanzor on our team, or any of our other Alliance staff with any questions. And now, before we get into the bulk of the webinar today on our Collegiate Zero Waste Playbook, I want to mention that we are going to be taking some time at the end to focus on some conversational discussion-based Q&A at the end of the presentation. But feel free to send over your questions into that question box in that same side panel, and we'll do our best to kind of consolidate all those questions and tackle as many of those as we can. We also received incredible questions in the pre-registration form, and so we'll try to get through some of those at the end of today's webinar as well. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our two panelists for today's webinar. We've got Lizzy Anast. She is a current graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder and pursuing a master's degree in sustainable planning and management with a focus in environmental justice and waste diversion. After her expected graduation date of December 2020, she looks forward to finding a job that combines her passion for sustainability, sports, justice, equity, and inclusion. In her spare time, she enjoys running, hiking, enjoying a glass of wine, specifically red, as we all do. And as a Michigan State University alumna, she also enjoys cheering on Sparty in both football and basketball. Thanks for being here, Lizzy. And Eliza is a graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder, pursuing a master's degree in sustainable food systems. At CU, she has worked as a member of Ralphie's Green Stampede to promote fan engagement with sustainability initiatives. And following her expected graduation in December 2020, she's excited to find a job that combines her passion for plant-based nutrition, athletics, and personal sustainability. In her spare time, you can find Eliza hiking with her dog Lassen or at the local gym, perfecting her lifts and practicing to become a CrossFit trainer. This is so great, you two. I'm really excited for all of the work that you've done over the course of this year. We've put a lot of effort into this Collegiate Zero Waste Playbook, and I think we're all really excited to hear what you two have in store for us. So I will pass it off to the team and take it away.
Thank you so much, Garrett. One thing we did want to say was we appreciate Garrett so much, and anyone who knows him knows just how great he is and how supportive he is, and we really couldn't have done this without him. So we just wanted to say, Garrett, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We really appreciate everything you've done to help make this a reality. But if you could go to the next slide. So as Garrett mentioned, we are both students in the MENV program at the University of Colorado Boulder. And in order to graduate, we have to do a capstone project. So because this is a professional program, instead of doing a dissertation or a thesis, we have to work with a professional company or an organization to get hands-on experience. And we decided to work with the Green Sports Alliance to create this Collegiate Zero Waste Playbook. Next slide. So again, we're the Masters of the Environment program. If anyone is interested, is a 17-month intensive professional program that really gets people immersed into the field of sustainability. So if anyone's interested in that, feel free to reach out to us after and we can give some information on that too. Next slide.
So the Capstone Project, as Lizzy mentioned, it is a key aspect of our graduate program that we spend most of our time at CU working on. And for our Capstone Project, we are working with the Green Sports Alliance to create our Collegiate Zero Waste Playbook. And if you could switch to the next slide, please. So for this playbook, we interviewed nearly 40 people from 22 universities across the country, as you can see on our map here. We were able to get a lot of stakeholder engagement, even though we had to do everything via Zoom during this time. But it was really exciting to hear everyone's diverse perspectives and experiences with waste diversion and was able to help bring together this playbook. Next slide.
Next slide, Garrett. Thank you. Oh, actually go back one slide, sorry. Do the introduction. Okay, so we want to talk about the reason that we created this playbook is so that anyone who's on, like if waste diversion is, let's say zero waste is a spectrum and you either don't divert any waste and all of your waste goes to landfill or you're diverting 100% of your waste. So the goal for this playbook was to create a resource where no matter where you are on the spectrum, you'll be able to walk away from reading the playbook with ideas, perspectives, certain solutions and some things that you haven't thought about. And one thing, when we first started doing these interviews, we assumed that there would be kind of like easy solutions. We assumed that we would be able to find themes and that they would be obvious and they would be transferable to all universities. And what we found was that that actually isn't the case at all, because every university is situated in such a unique position that there's no way you could hear something that worked at another university and it might not even be plausible at your university. So this playbook really just has everything that we heard from the individuals we interviewed. We tried to put it all together in this playbook to give everyone, different ideas and perspectives of things that will work at their university and maybe some things that won't work or that they'd have to tweak, but at least you can realize that those certain things are happening. And also the reason we wanted to focus on waste diversion is because waste matters and it's really significant. And the United States produces 30% of the planet's waste, but only makes up 4% of the overall world's population, which is really significant. And during the 2018-2019 football season, the NCAA football season, 46 million fans attended games in person. So, and all of those fans are contributing to waste. There's so much waste that happens at football stadiums and just collegiate sports in general. And that's a big reason why we wanted to focus on the collegiate space particularly. Next slide.
So in our playbook, following the introduction, you'll be finding section 1, which is making a game plan. So this is all about setting the stage and kind of getting ready to start building up a zero waste program. Throughout our conversations, we found that building a team and starting a dialogue and just working with other individuals across different university departments was a really key aspect in being able to build a really successful zero waste program. And we have a quote here from Brittany Mora, the recycling coordinator at Clemson, saying that we really do make an effort to collaborate because the only way that we can get things done is to work as a unified Clemson. And I think this really exemplifies the universities who have these really successful programs, is that they're interdisciplinary, they work with different program departments, and they're just able to come together, bringing their own unique perspectives, resources to just build a great program and be able to share that burden almost. Next slide, please.
Garrett, you're doing a great job with the slides, I just wanted to say. So then section 2 kind of looks at one thing. So section 1 talks about building relationships within the department and how to get conversations started, whereas section 2 discusses the importance of collaboration and networking happening outside of the university. So the universities that we talked to that had the most successful zero waste programs, and when I say most successful, I mean the ones with the highest diversion rates, they collaborated with outside organizations, whether it be nonprofits, high schools, really like the limit is endless to who you can collaborate with, and it's really important to build that community, and it allows you to have a lot of extra resources coming in to make the zero waste program great. And then this section also looks at the power of contracts and how competition can be used to help increase diversion rates. So contracts are really important, especially when it comes to vendors within the stadium, because if your vendors can bring in anything and there's no way to monitor that, it can be really hard to increase diversion rates. And then friendly competition. Sports is just inherently competitive, and that really should be used as an advantage. So the one cool thing too about sustainability is it's one of those things where if you're really passionate about it, you want other people to be passionate about it too, and you want to share what you have. And a really good way to do that is to create a competition. So the Pac-12 does the green game every year for football and basketball. So they really just getting conference levels involved can really help and like get people, the different universities that maybe weren't thinking about waste diversion, or like, oh, well, there's a conference competition, we don't want to be dead last, so maybe we should pilot something or at least try. And this is so important that actually when we spoke to people from USC, the first thing that they mentioned was how CU Boulder beat them in the green game. So it just shows that competition can be really useful in increasing waste diversion. And we talk a lot about that in section 2.
And we can take it to the next slide. So section 3, we're going to bring it back into the university for student involvement within zero waste. So students make up the university, the great biggest portion of it. Without students, the university wouldn't really exist. So they play a really important role, not just in the university, but in zero waste. So what we talk about in this section predominantly is the value of volunteers and how to recruit these volunteers, which you're going to be getting from the student population mostly. There are ways to be getting other volunteers beyond, but the greatest portion will be coming from your student base. And this can make a really big difference and change the campus culture, building a more sustainable community. So once these students are engaged in zero waste actions, once they start digging through the trash or just start talking to their peers about how they can be more sustainable and where to put their waste, which is recyclable, which is compostable, those sort of things. It's a really great way to just build your community and make a bigger difference overall. And some of these students will be student athletes, and that's a really great way to start engaging athletics and sustainability and start bringing those two together, because these student athletes bridge the gap. They're students first and foremost, but they're also athletes. So you're able to tie everything together and really get more people engaged through that. So, next slide.
Great. Section 4 walks through a typical game day, what happens before, what happens during, what happens after. So there's a lot going into this section. One of the main parts looks at volunteers. So section 3 kind of talks about the best ways to get quality volunteers. And section 4, we talk about really good places to put them that will help increase waste diversion. So that's scattered throughout the section. But first and foremost, this looks at the really important aspects are what's happening before the game and what's happening after the game, because those are really the ways that you can get better and improve. So it takes practice. You know, I'm talking about practice. You can't expect to just put up bins and have a successful zero waste program. So there's a lot that goes into planning beforehand, and this section really discusses that in great detail. And then it talks about after the game, who should be in the room and in the types of things that you should go over. So one really important aspect of a post-game debrief is getting your waste haulers involved. So if you have high levels of contamination, it's really important to know that, like, even if you do have a sort, there could still be high levels of contamination. And if your waste hauler isn't a part of that conversation, then it's really hard to make changes and to help increase diversion rates. So that's a big part of this section. And then we have this quote here from Mora, and it says, people tend to tailgate in the same place for multiple years, and after they're educated once or twice, it seems to stick a little more, and fans place their bags in the right spot with less contamination. So that kind of speaks to a good place to put volunteers, which we talk about in the section, as I mentioned, where if you have volunteers that are coming back again and again, talking to the same fans, that can really help increase diversion rates. And that is spoken to a lot in this section. And next slide, please.
And kind of pulling into what Lizzy was just talking about, fan engagement is really important. So why should you engage them? Well, they make up the majority of the waste that's going to be produced during these games. So getting them engaged in zero waste actions is really important for things to be successful. And engaging these fans can be done in a variety of ways, but 3 main takeaways that we found through our interviews were incentives, like giving out a signed football or giving out little reusable bags and stuff like that. And also just making it fun. USC had a trumpet fanfare, almost like a flash mob when somebody recycled, and just made it super exciting, and fans got super stoked to see them just kind of pop up out of nowhere and be like, ah, you recycled. And also building relationships. And this is really a key part, especially in the tailgating zone, as Lizzy was talking about before, because most of the time people in these zones come back year after year, and you can start building these relationships and bringing in how important sustainability is. And even if they're not really into it the first year or two, over time you're going to be talking to them about it again and again, and it'll stick eventually. So engaging these fans is essential to creating a culture of zero waste. You won't really be able to do much if you don't get them involved. Next slide.
Okay, so there is a collection of case studies in here too, 3, and we're gonna go over those a little bit. Garrett, if you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, there you go. So the first one, look, there's me, I'm famous. So the first study looks at Ralphie's Green Stampede in CU. So we have their mission statement here, which is, our mission is to create a system in CU athletics where every trip to the game makes the world a better place and encourages fans to adopt sustainable behaviors at home, work, and play. So this section really looks at Ralphie's Green Stampede and how it formed. It was created in 2008 and has been leading the charge for sustainability at CU. And one thing in particular about Ralphie's Green Stampede is it's a student-run organization. So, you know, I'm a graduate student and I'm the current manager. Matt Bone came before me. A lot of you probably know him. He's incredible. But it's getting even like speaking more to student involvement and student engagement. And this is a program that if it were to have to be full-time staff that took the charge on this, it might not be possible. So it really looks at the way to get students involved in a way that's incredibly transformative and makes a really strong fan engagement program. And anyone who's tailgated at CU probably knows that there's Franklin Field, which is adjacent to the stadium, that is an entire tailgate lot that is dedicated to zero waste practices, and it's a zero waste tailgate zone, and you're not even supposed to bring in any of your own cups, plates, anything. Those are all provided, and that really couldn't have happened without having the student-run organization start building the foundation of zero waste. Next slide.
So throughout our interviews, we talked to numerous land-grant universities, such as the University of Kentucky, and how they were able to really get into composting. So through through leveraging their research farms, the University of Kentucky was able to develop a flourishing compost program. But a key feature to this was that it started as a pilot. And I think Joanna said it best in our quote here, that it always seems less scary and gives people an out. But for the champions at the table, it's also a way of getting our foot in the door. And then once we prove this concept, we can then show people how it works. And I think this is a really important takeaway for not just them, but for other universities wanting to get into composting, is that it can be really difficult at the beginning, especially when it comes to taking food waste from either pre-consumer or post-consumer. There's a lot of issues that can come from it. So being able to run it as a pilot has made a huge difference and really enabled them to get a really good program going and getting people engaged, even if they were a little wary about it at the start. So yeah, next slide. And then we're going to jump to Auburn. So volunteering at Auburn University is really impressive. Through introducing and engaging students with waste diversion at the very beginning of their academic career, they're able to create a culture of volunteerism, and students come back year after year to help volunteer at the tailgates and hand out bags and help engage other students. Through setting up tables at their Camp War Eagle, which is their freshman orientation, they're able to get freshmen involved and be able to get them engaged with volunteerism. And we have a quote here from Joan Hicken saying, "I have students that have volunteered for me all 4 years of their academic career. Most students volunteer more than once, and I think that's wonderful. A lot of the volunteers aren't even really there for the football. They're there more for the volunteerism, the sense of community, and the environmental component." And I think this really speaks to what we were mentioning before at creating a community and creating a culture. It really kind of reinforces that and bringing in that aspect of volunteerism to zero waste. And next slide.
Yes, we loved interviewing with Auburn. We just thought they were great. So the final takeaways from the playbook: we want universities to have a network. You know, just inherently reading this playbook, we've already kind of created a network of people you can reach out to learn more about their programs. So that's one of the benefits. We talk about general zero waste best practices, and as I mentioned, we thought we would say, oh, this is the perfect way to accomplish this. And that unfortunately just isn't the reality. But there are a few themes and best practices. For example, all waste diversion programs that were successful had volunteers. So I would say that volunteers is one thing that's really important, but the playbook goes over different ways to get volunteers involved. And then there's case studies that give specific insights and ideas of how to create different programs, as we just mentioned. And then this playbook really highlights unique ideas. And what we really want to do is inspire people. And obviously, everything hasn't been done. There's people we haven't spoken with, universities that are doing a great job with waste diversion that we weren't able to talk to. And they probably found creative solutions. And that's the thing, is you shouldn't be limited. Like, don't limit yourself to what you can accomplish when it comes to waste diversion. It just takes an idea, and it takes figuring out who you should talk to make that happen. So we really hope that this playbook will inspire people to kind of take a chance to put their foot forward and say, you know, I think we should make this happen. Let's figure out how we can do that. And we're really hoping this inspires people to do that. Next slide.
And we want to give thanks to everyone who helped make this playbook possible. All of the people that we interviewed, our advisor, Kimberly Kosmenko, and especially Garrett Wong. You guys have made this be able to make, it's just an amazing process, and it's so exciting that we were able to work with everyone and talk to everyone. It just really built a really strong base and like great playbook, and we're really excited to share it with everybody. So if you want to switch to the next slide.
Yeah, I also want to just say thank you, everyone we interviewed. It was so fun talking to all of you over the summer. Like, what a great way to spend the summer. We just got to interview a bunch of different people and hear what they're passionate about. So the release date for the playbook is December 1st, 2020. Don't have an exact time, probably in the morning, I would guess. It's a Tuesday, if anyone is wondering. Yeah, that's all we have. Garrett, if you want to hop back on and we can start fielding some questions.
You betcha. And hats off to both of you. This was an incredible experience, honestly, to be able to work alongside the CU Boulder team and to be able to expose our collegiate network to the broader opportunities of what's out there in terms of zero waste game day operations, and especially with the number of case studies y'all were able to put together. Of course, specifically talking about the 3 that you just had presented on, but so many other insights that you had mentioned from USC, CU Boulder, University of Washington, all across the board over to University of Michigan and Clemson and everybody in between. What an incredible experience for both of you, and we're excited to see the full product here after the Thanksgiving holiday. Again, I know we're getting a lot of questions coming through right now, so a reminder to folks that we have the opportunity right now to dive into some Q&A, ask some questions, and just have a general discussion about what's going on and taking place across this collegiate space, especially right now. We do have a couple of questions that I wanted to maybe kick off first with, and maybe we'll start with Eliza on this one. I guess primarily because you focused on collegiate sports within this playbook. What advice would you have for viewers right now that are based in professional sports teams, if they're within the NBA, the NHL, or others, as they start planning for their upcoming season or planning for their next game? What advice would you provide to those viewers that are based in professional sports and want to still improve on their zero waste operations?
I think that professional sports have a lot of opportunities here. We focused on collegiate athletics because there's a lot more nuances and a much more complicated bureaucracy, and usually have a smaller budget than professional athletics. So they need a little bit more to really get engaged, but professional athletics really have an opportunity to kind of push this through. They usually have a much wider audience and can really make a bigger impact in getting fans involved and making an impact in where they're procuring their items for their stadium and stuff like that. So I think they have a lot they can do, especially with their procurement and getting fans engaged, which can definitely be seen in our playbook. So they'll be able to check that out.
That's awesome. Lizzy, there's a question coming in now on something that you didn't touch on entirely, but I think it's really important that we touch on this. I know it'll be within the playbook as we were creating this, but what focus was placed on the kind of prep? As you mentioned, it takes months or even weeks as you approach a game day, and specifically at procurement, what comes into the facility, what comes into the stadium. What kind of focus was placed on procurement as they're coming into these facilities? I mean, what materials were most frequently discussed in those interviews, and what kind of trends did you see as you were talking with these universities?
Yeah, I would say that procurement's really important, because if you're deciding to change any sort of like the bin system that you have or the signage, you really have to know what's coming into the stadium. And sometimes contracts, can be 10 years at least. I think that everyone we spoke with, that was kind of the length of the contract. So if you have a contract that's 10 years long and you're only 2 years into it, it might not be the perfect time to try to change all of your bin systems if the things coming into the stadium aren't recyclable or compostable. So that you have to make sure you pay attention to that. But what you can also look at is negotiating those contracts. So when the time comes up, let's say you're a university and your contract is up next year, now would be a great time to say, hey, we really want to make sure that what's coming into the stadium is recyclable and compostable. So let's start having these negotiations. And the University of Texas, we talked to them, and they actually have a system where if you drink from it, you recycle it, and if you eat from it, you compost it. So things like that of thinking, okay, what's coming into the stadium, where do we want it to go afterwards, and how can we influence that?
And I think
Love
just
it.
addition, sorry about that, Garrett, is that there are going to be some things that are out of your control, like chip bags and candy wrappers, and like taking those into account when you're thinking about your procurement and what you're going to be doing with your waste stream. You have to account for those other variables, which are important to take note of.
Absolutely, I love it. Another question, and this could be for either one of you. I know a lot of these focuses were primarily central to football operations as this was in prep for the fall season. But can these practices be utilized at other sporting events? Did other interviewees that you had speak heavily on some of their other sporting events that they hosted on campus?
Yeah, I'll say it's definitely transferable. And one really cool, one university we spoke with actually piloted, we talked about the benefits of pilots here, piloted their zero waste program at the small level sports, the smaller sports, and then were able, when that was successful, they were able to extrapolate that and say, hey, look, this really worked here. Let's do this at a larger level. So it can go both ways. If you're really starting this journey and trying to figure out if you should invest in certain different bin systems or should invest in signage, a really great way to do that is within the smaller sporting events.
And I think a part of that too can be kind of put onto the student athletes. I know we talked to the University of Ohio, and student athletes from other sports really were excited to see all of the zero waste actions being done at the stadium for football, and they really want to bring that to their sports. So that can kind of be reflected in these other sporting events, even though if they're not already there, students are probably going to be wanting them to see it there.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. I love to see kind of this opportunity for so many athletes and sports to be engaged in this, because there are going to be some sports that are more heavily attended than others. But if there is an opportunity to still engage that athletic and alumni community, I think that's still an amazing opportunity for the zero waste operations to still show its worth in more places than one. This is a question we got in pre webinar. This was in the registration form, but this is actually from a team member over at CU Boulder. What is the easiest adaptation for schools not doing zero waste to start implementing it? Would it be education, signage? What would be kind of your first recommendation for a school going from nothing to starting their journey?
Yeah, this is a really hard question, and I hate to say this, but it depends. It really does. And to make a few assumptions with this question, like let's assume that all the stakeholders are on board and want to make the switch. Let's assume that there is a budget involved, and now they're inside of the stadium figuring out, okay, what should we do? I would say it really depends on what's happening at your university. So if your vendors are already bringing in compostable and recyclable products, but your diversion rates aren't great and you want to introduce more composting bins or more recycling bins, then I would say education for the back of house, making sure they know where they're placing all of their waste. And then signage would be a really good place to start if you're inside the stadium and you already have the materials that can be put into those bins. But like, let's say your vendors are bringing in things that are mostly landfill based. At that point, I would say signage is probably going to be the most important, because maybe you introduce a few more recycling bins, or maybe you introduce a few more composting bins. But signage is going to be most important to help make sure that contamination isn't infiltrating any of that. Eliza, anything to add?
No, I think just talking about the education and signage, I think those are really important, especially when you're talking about people who are coming in and working the concession stands who aren't actually hired through a university, or if they're student groups, they're coming in just one at a time, like they're coming at a game and a game, they're just rotating through. So they really need help making sure everything gets put in the right place.
Absolutely. Another question coming in from our friends over at the Sport Ecology group. How can you promote waste education along with implementing these techniques for zero waste? Are they one and the same? What pieces or maybe examples that you have could be used for both in terms of promoting the education and also actually increasing your efficiency?
I would say that they're almost one and the same. I think personally that learning through action is really important and can kind of just make a deeper impact, and kind of you can bring it to your own daily life. And at sporting events specifically, I think volunteers, like they're the boots on the ground, they're the ones making this happen, and they're helping out, making sure everything gets put in the right place, but also they're talking to people, helping them put things in the right bin, being like, oh, this is compostable or this is recyclable. And they're the ones, it's kind of small education. It's not like taking a class on waste, which would be a very one to say the least. But it's education in application, which I think is a really great way to promote and engage people with zero waste.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, Eliza, is volunteers came to my mind immediately, and how they have the ability to, stand by bins and educate fans while they're putting their waste into the bin and saying like, oh, the bin that has a circle on it, you're right, I should probably put my can into that bin. And it's just sometimes people just need, like, you're at a sporting event, if some people are drinking and they're having fun and they're excited about their team, where they're placing their waste isn't probably the first thing on their mind. So it's definitely in volunteers can help. And then one example that I actually just thought of was that at CU Boulder, they do vendor training before the games. And what they've done is actually said that the vendor that has the best diversion rate, and this is kind of, they just eyeball what happens or what's happening, like they do the education beforehand, check during like halftime, and then go there after the game to see how many, if there's a lot of contamination. But then the vendor, the station that has the best diversion rate actually gets a gift card. So that's a really good way to promote education and say, hey, we're doing this training, please make sure you put everything in the correct place. And also if you do, you win something. So that's a good way to incentivize with implementation and education.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. We've got a question from Kai over at UEFA. Within the playbook itself, how do you address communication strategies and best practices, as they really seem to be sometimes the most difficult with a lot of organizations? Do you have any examples within the playbook or any examples that come to mind from your interviews?
Yeah, so communication was a really big piece, and almost everyone talked about it. I mean, we're talking about it right now, we're communicating. So I think that it's really important to just keep in mind that every university is shaped differently. There's siloed universities, there's universities that are naturally interconnected. So getting these conversations started can be pretty difficult or easy. It depends. Like Lizzy said earlier, unfortunately, the answer might be it depends. But one example that we had was from Shane Stenz at the University of Minnesota. He wanted to work with athletics, and he came to them just wanting to learn about their processes and just see what they're doing and how they could do it better. He didn't want to walk in and say, oh, you need to change this, because people will immediately be turned off and be like, no, we're happy with how things are. We don't want to change anything. So just coming at it from a point of interest and wanting to collaborate and just learn and just get that relationship going and just build those relationships and have a foundation for those communications, and then you can start building off of them.
Perfect. Love to hear that. We've got some questions now coming in live, and I'm going to do my best to kind of bundle them together so that we can hit everything. One common theme that we've been seeing is based on really that student volunteerism piece for universities. I mean, you mentioned in your case study that CU Boulder has a student-run organization that is really championing a lot of the tailgate pieces. A lot of these efforts that you're really teeing up on is volunteer-based, mostly by students, both in the Auburn instance and the Ohio State. I mean, when you have so many students that come in for 3, 4, 5 years for their collegiate experience, sometimes you lose champions across the way. And there's certainly an inherent high turnover for some instances. I mean, what would your recommendations be, and what have y'all seen to make sure that these programs and these initiatives can stay afloat even when the staff turnover, if they're based in your student body, is so quick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that one thing is that if you are creating incentives and making it fun for students to do it, they're more likely to tell their friends, bring their friends with them. Some places they give out tickets to the game, and if you really want to go to the game and you don't want to pay for a ticket, it's really easy to get people to come back again and again. So I would say building up this level of community surrounding your volunteerism. So, getting everyone together before the game and saying, hey, let's all hang out now and let's all hang out after. And instead of treating it as just volunteers that are coming, it's really this community that's created where people, they want their friends to come because they have such a good time. And I'm assuming that friends transcend through the different years. And, perhaps you even have someone that is the volunteer coordinator that's actually a volunteer, and they kind of bring it upon themselves to recruit people. And I work, for Ralphie's Green Stampede, and before this it was Matt Bone, and he really did a great job of getting students involved. He was always talking to our cohort. And then I actually got Eliza involved, and I got Sarah Starr involved, who's one of our other colleagues for Ralphie's Green Stampede. So I would say once you get someone who's passionate, they want their friends to come. They're like, hey, hang out with me, tailgate with me on Saturday. This is what we're doing. It's really, really fun. So it's about making it fun and building that sense of community. And I really, truly think that gets people to come back again and again. And then it fills up the pipeline where they can fill in the shoes of the people before them because they had a relationship already.
Yeah, creating those really exciting shared experiences within volunteer groups is super important for building the community. And community is such a big aspect that kind of flows through every part of our playbook, and just community underlined twice. Say.
That's awesome. And I think we've gotten a couple of other themes that I'm trying to form together right now. One of them is on this relationship, I think, that you talked about a little bit. It's that relationship between the athletics department and the sustainability department. I mean, so many of these interviews that you had done were based within the sustainability or environmental center at each of these universities. But sometimes there is that disconnect between what athletics is trying to do during game day, what the sustainability goal of the campus and the department is, and how you implement that within game day. What kind of recommendations would you have in terms of being able to increase that engagement from your athletic department partners if it isn't there? And what examples have you seen from even folks that you interviewed that were based in the athletic departments that you see a lot of promise in terms of being able to make that relationship more bought in from either side?
I would say, just to start, that it only takes one person. And I think that there's enough people within an athletic department that there's someone there that cares about sustainability, and it's kind of putting in the work to figure out who that person is. And we did see that at a few places where someone within the sustainability department just got into contact with someone within athletics that was passionate and cared, and that's the way they got the ball rolling. And it can be a little bit slow, but it's still happening, and that's really important. If your athletics department is really kind of against it or don't want to make change, you have to find a way to make sure that there's someone in there that you can talk to about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with that too, I'd say the sustainability within the different, the word is blanking on me right now. Like the Pac-12 and the SEC, the competition between universities within those are going to be a really great way to kind of encourage and leverage your athletics department to be like, hey, look at what they're doing. Don't you want to be the best in every aspect, not just with athletics?
Mm-hmm.
Should get your foot in the door and start doing sustainability too.
Very cool.
Yeah,
and shout out to Dave Vanaventer and Ezra Moberly for their engagement in that. That was a question that both of them had like-minded questions on. One piece that's coming out from our friends down at the IFAS extension down at University of Florida. Randy has a question for Eliza, specifically on your interest in food systems. When you were talking with a lot of these universities, what did you see in terms of how they're dealing with food recovery, food waste, and even compostable materials? Was that a major part of your discussions?
So we talked to numerous universities who had food recovery programs. We really want to see where everything ended up, and food recovery is actually one way for these waste streams to kind of end up instead of just putting everything into compost. And universities like the University of Louisiana Lafayette, they partnered with Second Harvest to be able to take all of that leftover food and be able to donate that to different organizations and food pantries near them. But not every university is doing stuff like that. I think that's just another level of outside engagement that can be addressed. And I think it's really cool to see universities kind of building those networks and trying to think of a more, just a way to utilize their resources and not just throw everything away. Even if they're composting their extra food, there is a better way to be able to get rid of the food.
Right. I mean, there's so many opportunities even that we've seen in the Green Sports Alliance where professional teams say, here are the servable pieces of food. Here's how we take it to our partner that we were set up with, either via the Green Sports Alliance or another internal partner. And just finding those opportunities. It's always been a discussion of not recycling or composting, but always recycling and composting, right? It's a holistic conversation that you mentioned needs to incorporate those vendors and outside organizations, as you mentioned, that need to be a part of these discussions. And something that we actually got a question from Emily here. Maybe this is a question for Lizzy, as you've seen some pieces as the manager of Ralphie's Green Stampede. I mean, how can these vendors and suppliers really help provide that added value and assistance in setting up your zero waste program? Is that because of their dollars? Is that just because of their involvement? Or are there other pieces of that negotiation and of their inclusion in the program that help really drive setting up a successful program?
Yeah, I think that there can be. I think first and foremost, a lot of that is bottom line related of what they're bringing into the stadium. So you have to be cognizant of that. But there is also a level of like vendor training where some athletic departments like U of M, for example, where they actually have a separate training for all of their vendors to help with waste diversion. And so in that sense, the vendors could really provide some value in saying like, okay, making sure that whatever they have in the back of house is being put in the proper place. But they could also do some fan education as well, just based on, you know, where they're standing. They are interacting with fans. They might even be close to waste bins and can see where people are or aren't putting waste. But they have a way to definitely influence it that way.
Absolutely. Anything else, Eliza?
No, I think you said it well. I would say exactly what you did.
Perfect. I'm trying to do my best. We've got so many questions and trying to consolidate them all together. Here's an interesting one. It's actually something that we kind of touched on a little bit with the students volunteer turnover, but this is a question from Karen Babler up at University of Washington. Because really you're trying to set this up for the fall, right? In a zero waste program, whether it's from year to year and things like that, you're going to have this chunk of time before school starts where you're engaging with students virtually, sometimes on campus. What suggestions do you have for engaging your students and volunteers during that time prior to the semester starting in that Christmas holiday season, or even in that month of July, August, trying to prep for your first couple of home games? What are some best practices for engaging those volunteers and students?
I'd first like to say hello to Karen. We miss you. She was lovely to interview. I would say one thing is if you have a listserv, it's great to the volunteers that you've had in the past or ones who have signed up to be interested in, having a list of all those volunteers and inviting them to other events that are going on. So for example, CU Boulder over the summer has this big type of orientation concert thing that is a zero waste event. And normally, Angie Gilbert, who's in charge of the ROC, invites her team to come work that. But you could reach out to volunteers and ask them if they want to be a part of that event as well. There's other things too, like Auburn, their War Eagle orientation. They do set up the booth to help them educate other students, but maybe the booth is run by current volunteers. So kind of things like that, I would say getting them involved, maintaining a form of communication, or like it's this community building, just even reaching out and saying, hey, everyone, thanks for volunteering this season. If it's like around the holidays, I just want to wish everyone happy holidays. Hope everything's going well. I really think things like that go a long way, and they also help just build and perpetuate that sense of community.
Yeah, just keeping those connections going and trying to keep them involved as much as you can, especially when things are really virtual, like even trying to do something with social media or like the listservs, like Lizzy was saying, just trying to keep them engaged and up to date on what's happening and seeing if there's any opportunities for them to get involved in any way possible.
I think it's that sense of community, right, that you say is so important here. It's being able to have that both campus culture, the team culture, and being able to utilize that power to make sure the program is successful both from year to year and even in those transition periods, right? We've got a couple more minutes here, and I want to try to get in as many questions as we can. One question that's coming in is looking at really just the conversation of, okay, you've got, so many folks that are a part of this conversation: athletics, campus sustainability departments, the student body, alumni, outside volunteers, and community partners and organizations. But you also have this part within that athletics piece. It's the coaches, it's the student athletes, the ones that really want to champion this. And we've seen some universities that have had really prime examples of motivating the community, the fan base, and the students to educate others and divert waste and to have a sustainable program at these universities. Do you have any examples of how athletes are being engaged in these zero waste programs?
Yes, I would say one being at the Ohio State University. Obviously, Ohio Stadium has fabulous diversion numbers. And they actually, so Cassidy Jenny, someone we spoke with from there, kind of created this group for student athletes to be a part of. And what she found was that student athletes were outside of football were saying, hey, how come the football stadium is zero waste and we're not? That's not really fair. And so then she realized that student athletes don't have a ton of time and they don't necessarily have the resources or know how to make that happen. So she was able to provide them with those resources. And a lot of those athletes actually went to their coaches and said, hey, if they're zero waste over there, then we should be zero waste here. Like, why can't that happen? And the whole team was like, yeah, we all want that too. What's the deal? And then the coach was able to go to the athletic director and say, hey, we need a budget for this. We need to make this happen. This is something that my athletes really want. So I think really what sparked that was Cassidy being able to give them the resources and saying like, hey, here's a little one-sheeter that you can read to your coach about how this is important to you, and hopefully that should be able to make a difference, and it actually did in that case.
I think even beyond just getting zero waste in their athletics, like getting them involved in volunteering. I know some universities that we talked to had them just helping out during game day, riding around on these recyc bikes that people would throw their recycling in, and having them just talk to people. Students who aren't student athletes are probably going to be pretty excited to be talking to people who they're cheering on the team for.
That's awesome. And there's so many other, great opportunities that we included in this. I mean, you can think about the student athlete team down at Oregon State, the folks over at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point that have student athletes engaged in these conversations and propelling the sustainability department to do more, propelling the athletics department to do more. And all of this is a collective effort from so many different fronts. We've got 5 minutes left here towards the top of the hour. I've got 2 questions left for Lizzy and Eliza today as we close out today's webinar. I mean, from your personal perspectives, maybe we'll start with Eliza here. Did you have a favorite case study or interview that you conducted, or it was whether it was just a fun conversation or if it really drove in with your passion that you have within sustainability in sports? What was one that you'd like to really mention here for everybody today?
Well, I think I already talked about it earlier, is the University of Kentucky. I really loved what they were doing with their composting. As a food systems student, I found it super interesting how they were able to wrap this all around, getting their food waste to their composting site at their farm and then bringing that compost back and using it on their facilities. It was really great to see. And also, in my undergrad, was in chemistry, and they were talking about all these little microbiotic bacteria that they use to eat the odors, because that's always a concern, an issue with universities having composting. Like the bins are, if they sit out, they're gonna smell bad, but they were able to find a solution to that, which I thought was really cool and innovative, and I had no idea that that existed. So it was really interesting and cool to see.
Lizzy, did you have a favorite? Not to play favorites with the 20+ interviews that you had, but
mine is funny. Eliza, this was very about presses. Mine was honestly with Mike Kensler at Auburn, who's like my best friend now. And I unknowingly mentioned, I was like, okay, I want you to talk about Clemson or Auburn, so wear that hat, and then talk about like the SEC, so wear that hat. Unbeknownst to me that he actually has a world record for his hat collection. Not true. He just has like the largest collection of hats ever. And it was really funny. And he's from Michigan too. And so we just had a great time. So that was my favorite interview.
That's fantastic. For anybody that's met Mike either at our GSA Summit or at ASHE or any other conference, you will see him with a different minor league baseball hat every single time. And it's impressive. I'm sure seeing that hat closet, as most folks are sneakerheads, his hat closet, I could imagine, is pretty fun to behold. Last question before we close out today. What's next? I mean, after this playbook, it's off to graduation and whatever's next into 2021. What are you thinking here, Lizzy, on what you want to do post-graduation?
Well, I'd love to work within the university space specifically, and I love outreach and volunteerism and getting the community involved in event planning and just everything under the sun when it comes to that, obviously associated with sustainability. So that's kind of what I am looking for. Yeah, Eliza?
So as I've mentioned, I'm a food systems student. So I'm really passionate about plant-based nutrition and how that can be enhanced, not just environmental sustainability, but personal sustainability. So be able to kind of connect the environment and personal just kind of life, kind of bringing that full circle and working towards just an overall more sustainable future for people in the planet is kind of where I would like to end up.
That's awesome, you two. And again, hats off to the incredible work that you've both put into this, speaking to so many different platforms of what the universities are doing and what best practices and case studies they could provide into this network, and really excited to see this completed product on December 1st. For everybody tuning in today, thank you so much for joining us. 3 deliverables that I'll be getting out to everybody. One is the slide deck from today. We'll get that out to you as soon as we can, along with the recording of today's webinar. And then once we are completed with the playbook on December 1st, everybody on this webinar and everyone within our GSA network will have that out in front of them and ready to dive into. If there are any other questions that I can help answer, feel free to reach out to us at the Green Sports Alliance. And again, Lizzy, Eliza, thank you so much for your incredible work on this. We will talk again soon, and thanks everyone for tuning in today.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.